So I will start by saying my name is Sara Wallgren. I am a visual artist based in Sweden, and I'm working mainly with the fields of drawing, sound installations, and working with art in the public sphere. Sound is an integral part of my art practice, even when I work with drawings, as they are often visualizations or representations of sound. I can sometimes even think of the drawings as sound installations or silenced sounds. What draws me to work with sound is often the physical or psychological properties of sound. I like to explore the impact of sound, how it can create vibrations, how it can change a mood, how it can impact our heartbeats, and how a sound can change in relation to architectural spaces. I'm a teacher at a preparatory art school on the west coast of Sweden, Gävleborg. And here the students are receiving a foundational education in preparation for further studies at art academies or other higher creative educations. The school was founded in 1944 by Arne Isaksson, an artist working primarily in a classical watercolor technique, but in a very experimental way. The school he founded was changed over the years, but many of Sweden's most active and well-renowned artists have passed through here in one way or another. In this talk, I've chosen to talk about and follow a train of thought that makes up different parts of my life, my art practice, things that I'm curious about and want to learn about, situations that fascinate me and situations that puzzle me. The train of thought that I will share here is open for configurations and additions throughout the talk. So if you feel like adding something to the topic, please do. This way, the train of thought will possibly take another route in the future and expand into new fields. When I was invited by Sylvain to present the talk here at the Eden Summer Institute, I immediately started thinking about talking about sound. Sound is perhaps what fascinates me the most. It is everywhere, but invisible most of the time. When I'm teaching, I'm always encouraging my students to be present in their choices of materials that they work with. I encourage them to be curious and conscious about all parts of their projects, material, process, subject matter, and motifs. Everything is easier and more exciting to work with if you're curious about it and want to learn something. Therefore, I decided to build this talk around things that I know a little bit about and are curious to learn more about. So I will now take you on a little walk between different topics, spanning from sound to public spaces and shared learning. And I will begin by talking a little bit about sound. Most people have heard the philosophical question, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it still make a sound? This question was first published in an American journal called Chautauqua in 1883. When I heard this question the first time, my immediate answer was, of course it does. If the tree falls, the mechanisms of the wood breaking, the impact when the tree hitting the ground, the possible birds sitting in the tree, flying away, chirping. As I don't believe in solipsism, I believe that things are happening even if I'm not there to observe. But then I read in a physics journal a little while ago where this philosophical question was answered through a physicist's perspective. When the tree falls, energy will be released in the shape of sound waves. The sound waves are only particles moving through the air. And if not captured by an eardrum, animal or human, and then transformed by the sensory system into a sound, it is not a sound. It will only be energy moving through the air. Our brains interpret physical vibrations as meaningful auditory experiences. And I will not open the lid to the jar that has a quantum physics explanation to this question, as in quantum physics, you can talk about something called the quantum observer effect. Simply explained, it sort of means that by just observing or measuring a situation or an object, the observer changes the object or the situation. This is one of the things that I find so fascinating with sound. It is ubiquitous, but mostly invisible or undetectable. It might be there and not be there at the same time. Moving on from sound, I move into space. Not space as the big Weltraum, wrongly accused of being completely silent, but spaces as in rooms, buildings, public spaces, and private spaces. Areas that we share or areas that we keep to ourselves. I think of A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf as a reminder of how a private space can be necessary for thought and creation. I think of my own studio as an extension of my brain, a place where I can lift up thoughts and ideas, begin to materialize them, and look at them from another perspective. Another crucial function of my studio as an extension of my mind is when I write down or sketch out an idea that I have and put it out on the studio wall. If I stop thinking of the idea after it leaves my mind and materializes on a piece of paper on the wall, I know it's not worth to pursue. But if I continue to think about it and it begins to expand with more sketches, thoughts, etc., I know it is a possible beginning of a project. In the 1600s, Robert Hooke created one of the first more powerful microscopes. With his microscope, he could look into the structure in corks. When he looked into the cork, he discovered tiny little rooms, and he called them cells because they made him think about the tiny rooms that monks lived in the monasteries. Our cells, our tiny little rooms, contain all the mechanisms we need in order to live. The cells contain the little ribosome factories that create complex protein chains that are needed to build molecules. These molecules can make cellular tissue that creates all the different parts that are essential to life. In the cell's nucleus is also our DNA stored. And thus the cells, the tiny little rooms, hold the key to who we are and will be. Thus, the cell and the room of your own is essential to life, both the organic life and the life of creative thought. One of the many variations of cells that exists are the hair cells in the inner ear's cochlea. These cells are responsible for converting sound vibrations into electrical signals. These cells have hair-like structures called stereocilia that bend when stimulated by sound vibrations. This movement is triggering a chain of events that send auditory information to the brain via the auditory nerve. This makes it possible to hear the tree that is falling in the forest, or for you to hear my voice speaking. We also hear sounds impacted by the materials around us. If you talk in a church, you will sound very different than if you're talking in a recording studio. This is because the energy of the sound wave reacts with the surfaces around you. The sound wave might bounce in different directions due to certain shapes, or not bounce at all if the sound wave is absorbed by a porous surface. In a three-dimensional space, sound will be coming from all different directions. Often this is due to how sound travels in space and how many sound sources are in the same space. In the late 1500s, Thomas Tallis was commissioned to compose a piece for the octagonal banquet hall at the Nonsuch Palace in England. This is a palace that doesn't exist anymore, but blueprints and drawings show that the banquet hall had 8 walls with balconies. Thomas Tallis' piece Spem Allium was written for 40 voices. It is composed so that 8 choirs with 5 people each are performing the piece. It is easy to imagine how Tallis was inspired by the architecture of the banquet hall and composed a piece where 5 singers were placed on the 8 balconies and thus surrounded the banquet guests. A 500-year-old immersive sound installation. It has puzzled me that the piece seems to be written for the architecture, the space, and I wonder what the piece would have sounded like had the banquet hall had 9 or 5 walls instead, and thus had more or less singers. The singer's voice are made up of air. For a voice to exist, you borrow air from your surrounding. When exhaling, this air is pushed through the larynx, the voice box, and across the closed vocal cords. This airflow causes the vocal cords to vibrate. These vibrations are then shaped by the resonating cavities of the vocal tract, which include the throat, mouth, and nasal passages. This gives you your unique voice. When the singing stops, when Thomas Tallis' piece is not sung, the music retracts to their living quarters in the shape of sheet music. The composer scores, the lines and the dots and instructions become an object of music, a physical object that contains the music silenced, but can be released by musicians who translate the dots and the lines back to audible music. Other objects that potentially contain music, or at least sounds, are ringing rocks, also called lithophones. There is no known location near Eden in North Carolina, but the most famous one in North America is located near Pennsylvania, in what is called the Ringing Rock County Park. Ringing rocks create a metallic ringing sound when struck, and the sound resembles sounds of bells. A ringing rock is most often a volcanic rock or boulder, such as the above. The rock often contains a higher percentage of iron. Over time, a very long time, the exposure to different weathers has caused the outside layer of the rock to become clay-like. This creates a certain tension within the rock that gives it the ringing metallic sound. Many ringing rock locations have been found nearby ancient habitats and locations where cave paintings have been found, and some researchers suggest that the ringing rock have been used as a percussion instrument in rituals in some early cultures. The first technology and the first crafted tool used by mankind was a stone. Stones were sharpened to shave off meat from bones. They were used as weapons to hunt, and most likely used as tools to create new stone tools. There are many theories around how the verbal language was created, and many theories that are perhaps equally true. But one theory suggests that the development of verbal language occurs parallel and connected to early humans using stone tools. Ringing rocks have been found in close proximity to early sites of civilizations. Some early dwellings, such as the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, is located close to a site where the sonorous stones or the ringing rocks can be found. Though it is difficult to have any proof, some archaeologists and researchers suggest that language and music as a form of early communication arose alongside the first uses of tools. Although there are many theories regarding the evolution of speech and verbal communication, one belief is that language arose as one person explained to someone else, using a simple verbal sound, how to use and make these stone tools. As a consequence, verbal language will possibly develop alongside the rhythmic sounds of rock, possibly ringing rocks, struck against another rock. A syncopic background to early vocal sound. Another theory is that verbal language developed between the mother and the breastfeeding child. In my mind, I connect this historical event of listening to different sounds, mimicking and developing a verbal communication to my very vague knowledge about deep listening, and this is a term developed by Pauline Oliveros. Deep listening explores the difference between the involuntary nature of hearing and the conscious nature of listening, as it is described by herself. If you Google deep listening, this might come up. Deep listening is a practice of attuned, empathic attention that involves more than just hearing words. It's about understanding the whole speaker, their intentions, emotions, and unspoken messages by setting aside personal judgments and biases to create a space of safety and connection. Originally developed by composer Pauline Oliveros in relation to sound and music, the concept has been expanded to become a vital skill for improving communication, fostering understanding, resolving conflict, and building stronger relationships by allowing people to truly feel heard and acknowledged. End quote. A conscious listening, pertinent to making new discoveries, to hear one another, and to learn. Pauline is a composer and a musician. She was in the foreground in experimental electronic music in the 60s, using a tape recorder. Internet reveals that she was given her first accordion when she was 9, and she decided to become a composer at 16. In 1988, she and 2 fellow musicians stepped down in an underground cistern, a former water reservoir, to record music. The reverb and the resonance in the cistern was unexpectedly long, and the musicians found themselves not only improvising with each other, but also with their own created sounds resonating in the cistern. They began playing with the space they were in. After this experience, Pauline coined the term deep listening, initially because they were deep underground listening, but the term started having other meanings too. It became an expression and a term that were used in musical improvisations, rituals, meditations, and also teaching, all of which Pauline incorporated in her practice. Deep listening is a method that highlights that there is a relation between different bodies, objects, and surfaces in a room. Pauline Oliveros and deep listening, together with Thomas Tallis and his Spem in Alium for the non-such palace, is inspiring to me when I think about using sound in the public space or in an art space, a shared space, as it is a reminder that sound stands in relation to the space it is heard in and the shapes and materials within that space. In a way, I think that the room which the sound is heard in gives the sound its shape. With the perspective of being an artist, often working with drawing, where the drawn image can only ever come from and be perceived from one direction at the time, I think of the multi-directionality of sound. Sound can be perceived from multiple directions simultaneously, with ears and body as the sensory organs, and this way you can get a feeling of being in the middle or in the center of the sound. But to see a drawing, you will always have to stand in front of it, which positions you outside of it. As someone interested in sound and music, but not capable of creating composed music myself, I have often found myself fascinated by those who do. I have wondered how their process of thinking music must be different from how I think image and three-dimensional space. I'm also interested in the communication between musicians when playing. How small gestures, a nod with a head, a small movement with a hand, or just a breath reveal someone's part in a collective performance. Me and my partner Joe Cave recorded a choir piece for a public art installation for a hospital in Malmö, Sweden, a couple of years ago. The choir is one part of a larger public art installation at the hospital, spanning over 11 floors of elevator lobbies, a stairwell, and 7 elevators. The choir piece is presented in sculptural speakers made of wood, accessible both in the stairwell and in one of the elevator lobbies. I will talk a little bit more about adding sound to public space later, but first I wanted to show you a video, and this is documentation of one recording session of one part of the choir piece. The singers are standing in a ring, and to not break the drone-like tone accompanying the soloist, the singers indicate with their hands when they breathe. This choir piece is composed and conducted by Joe Cable. A hospital is a place where the public and the private meet. For most people, the body and mind is a private matter, shared with others more or less consciously. If you're a patient, most likely you are in a hospital because there's something wrong that needs medical help. For most people, that is an uncomfortable and possibly emotional situation. This causes an even bigger tension between the public space of a hospital and the private emotional state of a patient. When I was sketching for this commission, I thought about the most comforting situations I can imagine. And I thought about voice and my mother singing lullabies to me as a child. When I won the competition for the public art installation in the new wing of the hospital in Malmö, I won it with a proposal that would portray and focus on giving the hospital a voice, a comforting voice. But I also thought of the voice as being a bridge between staff working at the hospital, nurses, receptionists, surgeons, caretakers, patients, and visitors. The voice is the link between all the people and almost like a scaffolding holding up the function of the hospital. One cheeky little way of giving the hospital its own comforting voice was to replace the information voice in the elevators with the voices of the singers in the choir piece. I replaced the digital stereotypical voice that normally says floor 1, floor 2, doors open, etc., with the voices of international singers in the choir.
Plan 7. Plan 12. Hiss avstängd.
Plan 7. Hiss avstängd. Plan 12.
I think of voice as a sound representing the state of our bodies and possibly the state of our mind. Voice is air that we have inhaled, and when the air is pressed back out, it is passing through our vocal tract and is sort of shaped by our internal architecture and mental state. If you're happy, sad, stressed, or feeling sickly, this will impact the sound of your voice. The voice is my tool of talking to you. As we share a public space on the internet, you hear my voice transformed to digital data coming to you, your eardrums, from speakers. It is nevertheless a bridge, a platform, and a vessel for the information that I share with you. Some of the topics I have briefly mentioned, you might know more about than I do. Then please share. In the spirit of Pauline Oliveros, the Black Mountain College, and the Eden Summer Institute, whatever sound waves I send out, they can resonate with others, they might bounce back, or the sound waves created by my voice might just be dissolved into thin air. Thank you for listening.